When the empath finally goes silent, a tremor moves through the unseen fabric of the psyche, as though an ancient instrument has ceased its song, leaving only the resonance of what once filled the air. You must understand that silence, in this sense, is not the absence of sound, but the cessation of a subtle dialogue between the soul and the world. The empath has always been the medium through which hidden tensions, unspoken sorrows, and unconscious longings of others found expression. The empath listens not only with the ear, but with the entire body, the entire soul, as if every nerve and every chamber of the heart had been fashioned into antennae to receive the secret frequencies of human suffering and desire. And so, when this presence withdraws, when the empath ceases to offer that gentle reflection, what collapses is not merely the comfort of another's listening ear, but the entire balance of projection upon which fragile relationships and whole communities may depend. For the empath has long carried within themselves the disowned voices of those around them, the anger another dared not feel, the grief another suppressed, the longing another could not name. To lose this mirror is to be forced, suddenly and often violently, into confrontation with one's own shadow. That is why everything falls apart. Not because the empath wishes destruction, but because their silence removes the protective veil. I have seen this archetype play out countless times in the theater of the unconscious. The empath resembles the sacrificial lamb, the Christ-like bearer of burdens. Yet they are also the anima, the soul image that stirs the waters of consciousness. They absorb what others cannot endure, not because they choose it fully, but because some inner law seems to compel them. Yet every law of the psyche carries its counterpoint, its rebellion, its moment of necessary reversal. When the empath, exhausted, finally turns inward and refuses to carry the unbearable any longer, the projections that once clung to them like parasites are stripped of their host. The silence of the empath becomes like the silence of the oracle who closes her mouth. The seekers who depended on her prophecy suddenly stand before the abyss of their own ignorance. To grasp the depth of this event, you must understand projection as the primal act of the unconscious. Every human being projects the unendurable aspects of themselves outward, casting them upon others, upon gods, upon enemies and lovers. This is not a weakness, but a necessity. For without projection, the unconscious would overwhelm consciousness, drowning it like a man overtaken by floodwaters. Yet projection requires a vessel, a recipient. For many, the empath has been precisely that. They have been the priest, the healer, the confidant, the scapegoat. They have listened, absorbed, and even embodied the shadow content of those around them. But when silence comes, the field of projection collapses. A man who once leaned upon the empath's compassion to soothe his hidden rage now faces his fury unmediated. A woman who relied on the empath's gentle affirmation to quiet her self-hatred must now confront the raw echo of her own voice. Communities that depended on the empath's conciliatory presence to maintain fragile harmony find themselves split by old tensions that erupt without warning. Silence, therefore, is not emptiness, it is revelation. It is the apocalyptic unveiling of what has always been present but hidden beneath the empath's soft words, beneath their listening eyes. The dream will show us this truth. Imagine a dream in which you walk through a great hall filled with voices, laughter, arguments, and song. At the center sits a figure clothed in white, silent, listening. The voices swirl around them, feeding upon their stillness. But then, in the dream, the figure rises and departs. In that instant, the whole becomes a chaos of echoes, each voice no longer harmonized, each argument no longer balanced by an unseen listener. The laughter turns shrill, the song collapses into dissonance. You awake shaken because you realize the silent figure was the one who made all the voices bearable. This is the role the empath has played in waking life. And this is why their silence has the force of an earthquake. Now, let me speak directly to those who recognize themselves in this image. You have lived as a vessel for too long, as though your life were meant only to absorb the fragments of others' brokenness. You have mistaken this capacity for endurance as your identity, forgetting that it is both gift and burden. But silence calls you. Silence is not betrayal. Silence is individuation. It is the soul's refusal to be reduced to a function for others. Its demand to step out of the archetype of the sacrificial lamb and into the fullness of the self. The self, as I've told you, is the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious, both light and shadow, both personal and archetypal. It seeks wholeness, not endless martyrdom. When you choose silence, you are not abandoning love. You are allowing the self to claim you fully. You are saying, I will no longer be the perpetual mirror of another's unacknowledged darkness. I will no longer scatter my essence to maintain the fragile illusions of those unwilling to face themselves. I will let silence speak. For silence speaks with the voice of the unconscious itself. In myth, this moment is always portrayed as withdrawal into the underworld. Persephone is taken beneath the earth. Inanna descends into the great below. Christ enters the tomb. In each case, the descent is marked by silence, by absence, by the rupture of ordinary life. For the world depends upon the presence of the empath, whether as queen, goddess, or healer. And when they vanish, the seasons falter. The harvest fails, the disciple despair. Yet in that silence, something greater is born. Persephone returns with the knowledge of death. Inanna ascends transformed. Christ rises, transfigured. So too with the empath. Silence is the tomb, but also the womb of transformation. You may ask, but what of those who collapse when the empath goes silent? What of the families, lovers, and communities that fall apart? Here is the hard truth. Collapse is often the only path to genuine renewal. Without the empath's endless mediation, the shadow can no longer be ignored. Rage, envy, despair, all must erupt. All must be seen for what they are. It is only through such confrontation that true consciousness emerges. The silence of the empath forces the other to wrestle with their own angel in the night, to see the face of the God who was once projected upon the empath's gentle eyes, this process is rarely gentle. It tears apart false bonds, shatters illusions of harmony, reveals the fractures long concealed. But to cling to false peace is to delay individuation, to remain forever imprisoned in the play of shadows. When everything falls apart, it is not the end, but the beginning, the tearing of the veil that reveals the archetypal struggle beneath the surface. And those who survive this collapse with courage will discover within themselves the very empathy they once demanded of another. Let me tell you of a patient who lived this drama. She was a woman whose entire family relied upon her to soothe their conflicts, to carry their secrets, to absorb their resentments. She was like a living confessional, a perpetual presence of understanding. But within her, exhaustion grew. Dreams began to trouble her, dreams of drowning, of being buried beneath heavy stones, of walking voiceless through crowded rooms. Finally, in life, she withdrew. She stopped answering the late-night calls. She ceased offering words of comfort. She allowed herself silence. The family erupted, old feuds broke into the open. Siblings turned upon one another. Parents collapsed into despair. For a time it seemed all was lost. But within this chaos, something new stirred. Each member began painfully to face their own darkness. The father confronted his rage, the mother, her depression, the siblings, their jealousy, and the woman herself, in silence, discovered her own voice, not as echo of others, but as the deep song of her own self. This is the mystery I want you to see. Silence is not absence. It is the fullness of presence turned inward. When the empath goes silent, they enter into dialogue with the unconscious itself. They withdraw projections, not to punish others, but to reclaim the fragments of their soul scattered like shards across the world. They begin to live no longer as the passive vessel of others' shadows, but as the active participant in their own individuation. And though the world may collapse for a time, this collapse is the crucible of transformation. So if you feel the call of silence within you, do not resist it. Do not fear the guilt that rises, the accusations of abandonment, the collapse that follows. For this silence is the doorway to wholeness. And if you are among those who once leaned upon the empath, then do not curse their silence. Do not demand their return to the old pattern. Instead, take this collapse as your summons to face what you have long avoided. Enter your own shadow, wrestle with the angel. Let the silence of the empath awaken the voice of your own soul. For in the end, the silence is the great teacher. It strips away the illusions, the dependencies, the masks. It reveals what has been hidden and demands that each person stand alone before the abyss. When the empath goes silent, everything falls apart. Not because the world ends, but because a false world dies and a true one waits to be born. When silence takes hold in the life of the empath, one might imagine it as a void, a hollow absence. Yet in truth, silence is never empty. It is teeming with the voices of the unconscious, a vast subterranean chorus that has long been drowned out by the noise of human expectation and demand. For the empath, silence is the first time they hear their own soul without distortion, without the interference of 1,000 projected voices pressing upon them. It is the first time they see the contours of their own inner landscape, where the mountains of longing rise and the valleys of grief stretch into the unknown. But let us not romanticize this moment as if it were only liberation. For many, it begins with terror. The empaths, accustomed to defining themselves by their ability to serve, to absorb, to soothe, suddenly stands in the stillness of their own being. They look around and realize the applause of others has ceased. The cries for help have fallen silent. The endless tugging upon their heart has been cut away. They feel naked, purposeless, even guilty. And this is precisely the trial of silence. It confronts the empath with the possibility that their worth is not in what they provide for others, but in who they are apart from all demands. In the myths, such moments are always depicted as encounters with the underworld gods. Hades cites as Persephone, Inanna Ereshkigal. Christ descends into hell. These myths are not mere tales. They are psychic maps. They show us that silence strips away the persona, the mask of helpfulness, the mask of compassion, the mask of indispensability. What lies beneath the persona is the shadow, the repressed anger of the empath, the unspoken resentment, the longing to be seen for themselves rather than for what they give. When silence falls, this shadow rises, and it is not gentle, it roars like a lion long caged, demanding recognition. This is why the empath's silence often feels so catastrophic to others, for not only do they lose their vessel of projection, but they also encounter the empath's own shadow, which may finally emerge after years of suppression. Suddenly, the empath, once endlessly patient, become distant, even cold. Once endlessly forgiving, they may now speak words that sting with truth to those who relied upon the empath's endless giving. This transformation feels like betrayal, yet in truth, it is fidelity to the self. The empath has not betrayed others, they have ceased betraying themselves. Consider a dream I once encountered. A man dreamed he stood before a great mirror, and in the mirror he saw not his own reflection, but the face of a beloved friend, an empathic soul who had always supported him. But in the dream, the mirror shattered, and in its place he saw his own face, twisted with anger, sorrow, and need. He awoke in horror, realizing he had leaned upon his friend to reflect the image he wished to avoid. When the friend withdrew, the mirror was broken, and he could no longer escape himself. This dream is archetypal. It is the dream of every one of us when the empath in our life finally goes silent. The empath's silence is therefore not merely personal. It is collective, archetypal, and deeply alchemical. It creates what the alchemists call the nigredo, the blackening, the stage of putrefaction, where all false forms disintegrate. Families fall apart, relationships crack, communities descend into conflict. Yet this disintegration is the prerequisite for transformation. Without the nigredo, no gold can be created. No, self-realized, The silence of the empath is the fire that burns away illusion, leaving only the raw material of the soul. And here is the paradox. The empath's silence, while it feels destructive, is itself an act of love, though not the sentimental love of pleasing and serving, but the fierce love of truth. For true love does not perpetuate illusion. It calls the beloved into wholeness, even if that call is heard as abandonment. The empath's silence says to the world, I will no longer protect you from yourself. I will no longer carry what you must carry. I will no longer shield you from the shadow that is yours to confront. I love you enough to let you break, because only in breaking can you be remade. Yet for the empath, the danger is great. Silence can become isolation, and isolation can become despair. To withdraw into silence without understanding its meaning is to risk sinking into depression, to confuse individuation with abandonment. That is why the empaths must not only go silent, but must also listen to what arises in the silence. They must record their dreams, attend to the images of the unconscious, engage in active imagination. For the silence will be filled with voices, some angelic, some demonic, some ancestral, some divine. These are not hallucinations, but the archetypal contents of the psyche, pressing upward to be integrated. Imagine sitting in a darkened chamber. At first, you hear nothing, but as your ears adjust, you begin to hear whispers, then footsteps, then distant songs. Such is the empath's entry into silence. At first there is emptiness, then an overwhelming flood of psychic content. Here the empath must learn the discipline of discernment. Which voices belong to the shadow, which to the self, which to the archetypes of transformation. Without discernment, they may be overwhelmed, mistaking every voice for truth. With discernment, they can navigate the labyrinth, guided by the thread of their own emerging individuality. You see, individuation is always a path through silence. The noise of the world, the projections of others, the demands of family and society, all of these must be stripped away for the self to emerge. The empath's silence is therefore not an aberration, but a necessity. It is the psyche's demand for wholeness, and though others may fall apart, though entire systems may collapse, this collapse is sacred. It is the tearing down of false gods, false identities, false securities. In their place rises something deeper, the authentic voice of the soul. The shadow, too, must speak in this silence. And this is often the most terrifying aspect for the empath. They discover, perhaps for the first time, that beneath their gentleness lies rage, beneath their patience lies despair, beneath their compassion lies a hunger to be loved for themselves. These feelings shock them. They may think, I am not who I thought I was. But this is the truth of individuation. You are not only the persona you present to the world, you are also the rejected child, the silenced lover, the unacknowledged king or queen, the hidden god. Silence brings these figures to the surface, demanding that the empaths integrate them rather than deny them. A patient once described a dream in which she wandered through a silent forest. At first she was calm, but then she heard growls and saw glowing eyes in the darkness. She realized wolves surrounded her. Terrified, she prepared to flee. But then a voice spoke, "These wolves are yours." She awoke trembling, realizing that her silence had summoned the repressed instincts she had long denied. In the silence, the wolves emerged, not to destroy her, but to return her to her own wholeness. For empathy that denies instinct is incomplete. Compassion that denies strength is a mask. Only when the empath integrates their own wildness can their silence become fruitful rather than destructive. And so, I say to you, if everything falls apart when you go silent, do not despair. It is the work of the unconscious tearing down false structures. It is the hand of God breaking idols. It is the self insisting upon wholeness. Your silence is not the end, but the beginning. It is not death, but initiation. You are entering the mystery of transformation, the sacred alchemy, where lead becomes gold, where suffering becomes wisdom, where silence becomes song. Do not imagine, however, that this process is quick. The collapse may last months, years, even decades. Relationships may be lost, families estranged, communities shattered, but from these ruins something new arises. Authenticity, autonomy, individuation, and when, at last, the empath speaks again, their voice is no longer the echo of others' needs, but the resonance of their own soul. It is a voice that carries weight, not because it pleases, but because it is true. Yes, everything falls apart when the empath goes silent, but only so that everything false may die and everything true may be born. This is the archetypal rhythm of death and rebirth, silence and song, collapse and renewal. You are not merely an empath. You are an alchemist of the soul, a vessel of transformation. Your silence is the crucible, your being the gold. Trust it, endure it, and allow the world to fall apart, for only then can it be remade. When the empath withdraws into silence, the outer world experiences collapse, but within the inner world, something altogether different begins. In that stillness, in that refusal to continue being the vessel for everyone else's unresolved fragments, the unconscious begins to shift its weight. What was once dispersed into the lives of others, into their needs, their projections, their endless demands, now gathers back into the soul of the empath, like waters retreating from a flood. The empath begins to feel their own substance returning to them, but this return can feel at first like heaviness, as though all the abandoned children of the psyche are coming home at once. It is then that dreams become profound companions, for the psyche speaks most clearly in images. When the conscious voice has grown quiet, the empath who once carried the burdens of others often dreams of carrying heavy loads, of walking through houses filled with strangers, of being surrounded by voices that call out from every corner. But when silence comes, the dreams change. They become darker, deeper, more archetypal. Jung himself once said that when a dream appears with the force of myth, it signals a transition. And in this silence, The empath dreams of caves, of oceans, of vast and lonely deserts. These are not merely personal dreams. They are initiatory, carrying the force of the collective unconscious. Imagine a dream of descending a stairwell into the earth, each step leading farther from the familiar world. At the bottom, there is a chamber filled with mirrors, but in these mirrors, no reflection appears. Instead, there is only darkness. This dream image tells us that the empath has entered the underworld of the self, where the usual reflection of others no longer exists, and they must confront the void of their own unmediated being. This is a terrifying initiation, for it strips away every illusion of identity. Who are you? When you are not defined by the voices of others, who are you? When you do not exist as their healer, their comforter, their mirror, silence demands an answer, and the unconscious will not permit you to escape it. In myths, such initiations are marked by trial and ordeal. The hero must face the dragon. The goddess must endure the darkness of the tomb. The seeker must wrestle with the angel. For the empath, the ordeal of silence is the confrontation with the shadow of dependency. Yes, others depended upon them, but the empath too depended on being needed. It was their identity, their secret source of meaning. In silence, this dependency is broken, and it feels like death, but this death is the necessary sacrifice, for only by dying to the need to be needed can the empath be reborn as a whole individual. I remember a woman who came to me after choosing silence for the first time in her life. She had always been the healer, the friend who never turned away, the mother who gave beyond her strength, but she had reached exhaustion and fell into silence. Her family raged. Friends accused her of abandonment. She herself wept with guilt, and yet her dreams began to show her images of rebirth. In one dream, she saw herself lying in a coffin, but within the coffin, she was pregnant, carrying new life. She awoke, disturbed, but also filled with awe, realizing that her silence was not death but gestation, that something within her was preparing to be born. This is the paradox of silence. What appears as death to the outer world is often pregnancy in the inner world. Silence, then, is not only absence, but preparation. The unconscious fills the void with images, symbols, and voices that reveal the hidden depths of the soul. And the empath, who once heard only the cries of others, now begins to hear the whispers of their own forgotten self. These whispers are easily missed, for they are soft, subtle, woven into the fabric of daily life. They may appear as sudden desires, long suppressed, as anger that shocks the empath with its intensity, as joy that arises from no external cause. If the empath resists these stirrings, they may sink into depression, for the self cannot be silenced forever. But if they allow these whispers to become words, these words to become acts, they begin the true journey of individuation. It is here that the archetypes reveal themselves. The empath who goes silent is often pursued by the figure of the trickster, the inner saboteur who mocks their silence, tempting them to return to their old role. See how they suffer without you? The trickster whispers, See how guilty you feel. Break your silence. Return. Resume the burden. The trickster is not evil. It is the force of the old pattern seeking survival. But the empath must recognize it and resist. For every initiation requires the courage to endure temptation without surrender. Another archetype that emerges in silence is the wise old man or woman. In dreams, this figure may appear as a sage, a grandmother, a mysterious stranger who offers guidance. They represent the self, the inner totality that seeks to lead the empath into wholeness. Unlike the trickster, the wise one does not demand that the empath return to their old role. Instead, they point the way forward, deeper into silence, deeper into the mystery. The empath must learn to discern these voices, to recognize which belongs to the old bondage and which to the new freedom. The collective unconscious itself seems to stir when the empath goes silent. For the archetype of the empath is not individual, but universal, a form that appears in every culture, every myth, every religion. Christ carrying the sins of the world, Kuan Yin listening to the cries of suffering beings, the shaman who absorbs the illness of the tribe. These are all manifestations of the empath archetype, and in each case there comes a moment of withdrawal, a descent into solitude, a period of silence. Christ withdraws to the desert. The Buddha sits beneath the Bodhi tree. The shaman retreats into the forest. These silences are not abandonment, but transformation. The empath, in their own silence, participates in this archetypal drama, yet the world resists such silence. Families, lovers, societies do not easily relinquish their empaths, for they have come to rely upon them as unconscious stabilizers. This resistance often takes the form of accusation. The empath is called selfish, cold, unloving. These accusations sting because they touch the empath's deepest wound, the fear that they are unworthy unless they give. But here lies the test, to endure the accusation without surrender, to stand in silence without returning to the old pattern. For if the empath breaks their silence prematurely, they return not as a whole individual, but as a fractured vessel. And the cycle repeats. The collapse that follows the empath's silence is therefore both external and internal. Externally, relationships falter, communities fracture. Internally, the old identity disintegrates, the persona crumbles, the shadow rises. This double collapse is the crucifixion of the empath, the moment when they hang between death and rebirth. It is agonizing, but it is also holy, for in that crucifixion, the self is at work, shaping a new being, a new voice, a new form of love that is not self-erasure, but self-expression. I tell you, the empath who returns from silence is no longer the same. They no longer give to avoid guilt. They no longer absorb to avoid conflict. Their empathy becomes fierce, discerning, rooted in the self rather than in fear. They may speak fewer words, but their words carry the weight of truth. They may engage with fewer people, but their presence transforms those who are ready to face themselves. This is the paradox of silence. It seems like loss, but it is the birth of authentic presence. And if you are one who has been shattered by the silence of an empath in your life, take heart. It is not their silence that destroyed you, but your own reliance upon their voice to drown out your own shadow. Their silence is your initiation as well. Do not run from the collapse. Enter it. Let the pain break you open. Let the loneliness strip away your masks. Let the silence force you into dialogue with your own soul. Only then will you discover that you too are called to individuation, that you too must meet your shadow, that you too carry within you the archetype of the healer, not as someone else's mirror, but as your own. So the silence of the empath is both wound and gift, collapse and rebirth, destruction and creation. It is a mystery that cannot be fully explained, only lived. And if you find yourself within it now, whether as the empath who has gone silent or as the one confronted by that silence, know that you stand within an archetypal drama as old as humanity itself. Trust it, endure it, let it transform you. When the empath finally emerges from silence, it is not as they once were, but as something wholly new, as though the soul has passed through fire and water and returned bearing a radiance that cannot be dimmed. To the outer world, their silence may have appeared destructive, but to the inner world, it has been gestational, a slow reformation of the personality around the deeper axis of the self. What is born is not the same persona of endless giving, but a being who embodies compassion rooted in truth, empathy bound to discernment, and love that does not erase the self but honors it. The mystery of this transformation lies in the archetypal rhythm of death and rebirth. You cannot cling to life as it is without first undergoing a symbolic death, for the psyche demands renewal. For the empath, silence is this death, the death of old roles, of false identities, of compulsive self-sacrifice. But death, in the symbolic sense, is never final. It is the prelude to a new form of life out of the tomb, out of the darkness, out of the silence. The empath rises as an individual, no longer bound by projections. The return is always marked by a new voice, whereas before the empath's words existed to soothe and please, now they come with a weight that others cannot easily ignore. It is as if silence itself has impregnated their speech, so that when they speak, they do not speak only as individuals, but as vessels of something greater, the self, the archetypal voice that carries within it both personal and collective truth. People who hear them may feel disturbed, even offended, for truth is rarely gentle, and yet others, those ready to awaken, feel illuminated, liberated, even healed, because the empath's voice now carries the power of authenticity. But let us be clear, the empath's silence is not a permanent withdrawal from the world. It is a cycle, a rhythm, a movement in and out of engagement, like the mystics who entered the desert only to return bearing visions, like the shamans who went into the forest only to return with songs. The empaths too must return, yet they return transformed, no longer as the container of everyone else's unconscious, but as one who carries their own wholeness, and in doing so they call others into their own wholeness as well. Dreams after such a transformation often bear the images of flight, of radiant light, of reunion with forgotten parts of the soul. A man once told me that after years of silence, he dreamed of walking through a ruined city, and from the rubble sprouted green vines and blossoming flowers. He realized that his silence, which had seemed to destroy so much, had in fact cleared the ground for new life. Another dreamed of climbing a mountain and finding at its peak a great bell. When he rang it, the sound spread across valleys and cities, awakening countless sleepers. He awoke with tears, sensing that his new voice, born from silence, I had the power to awaken not through burden bearing, but through truth. What then does it mean when everything falls apart? It means that the false foundations of relationship, of identity, of community have collapsed under the weight of truth. It means that the illusions that kept people asleep have been stripped away, and though the collapse is painful, it is necessary, for individuation is not the maintenance of false harmony, but the emergence of authentic being. Without collapse, no one would awaken. Without silence, no one would hear the deeper voice. To those who are in the midst of such collapse now, I say this: do not despair. The breaking is the sign of transformation. The silence is the voice of the self. The collapse is the beginning of a new world. Do not try to rush back into the old patterns. Do not try to force the empath to speak before their silence is complete. Do not cling to what has already died. Instead, allow yourself to enter the silence as well. Let it strip you bare. Let it break your illusions. Let it confront you with your own shadow. For only then will you discover that what you feared most, your own darkness, your own loneliness, your own unmediated voice, is the very doorway to your wholeness. And to the empath, I say, your silence is not weakness, nor selfishness, nor abandonment. It is initiation. It is the path of the mystic, the descent of the hero, the transformation of the shaman. You are not betraying others when you go silent. You are saving them from illusions, calling them to face themselves. You are not betraying love. You are embodying its truest form, which is truth. And though the world may rage against your silence, know that it is only the resistance of projections dying, of shadows being forced into the light. Trust your silence. Let it work. Let it carry you into the self. One day, when the silence has done its work, when the unconscious has spoken and the self has taken its place at the center of your life, you will speak again. But this speech will not be like the old speech. It will not be endless words meant to soothe and placate. It will be measured, weighted, born of silence itself. And when you speak, your words will be like arrows that pierce illusions, like fire that burns away shadows, like seeds that fall into the soil of another soul. You will discover that your silence has given birth to a voice that does not merely echo, but transforms. Everything falls apart when the empath goes silent, but only so that a deeper order may emerge. The false world dies. The true world begins This is not only the journey of the empath, it is the journey of humanity itself. For we are all, in some way, empaths, carrying projections, absorbing shadows, avoiding silence. And we are all called, sooner or later, into that same silence, that same collapse, that same rebirth. It is the universal rhythm of death and resurrection, of darkness and light, of silence and song. So let the silence come, let the collapse happen, let the old world fall apart. For in the silence lies the self, in the collapse lies the truth, and in the breaking lies the possibility of becoming whole. And when at last you rise from silence, you will not return as who you were, but as who you truly are. And that is the gift the world has always needed, though it never knew it. Not your endless giving, not your silent endurance, but your authentic presence, your whole self, your true voice. This is the mystery, the paradox, the revelation. When the empath finally goes silent, everything falls apart. And yet, in that very falling apart, everything is finally made ready to be reborn.